This week I've dived back into the world of 80s American personal luxury with the 1989 Buick Reatta, arguably what I consider a much nicer 80s American personal luxury experience over what the Chrysler TC by Maserati was trying to do. The 80s were a fun time to be an automotive enthusiast. Finally breaking free of the doldrums of the late 70s malaise, automakers were going ham with new, non-traditional designs with fancy new tech. But at the same time, American luxury car makes were facing increasing pressure from European and Japanese imports. Lincoln was probably the most traditional of the bunch, utilizing traditional ladder frame, rear drive designs, despite downsizing from the 70s boat-like designs. Cadillac was busy swinging for the fences with new engines and mostly failing. Chrysler was doing Chrysler things. And Buick was surprisingly fun for the first time in a long while with their performance turbo cars, most notably the Grand National. But the loved G-body line the Grand National was based on would be phased out for an almost all front-wheel drive lineup to help the Buick brand maintain their surprisingly modern lineup for the time. Its replacement at the top of the Buick lineup would be, upon first glance, a very non-Buick Buick. A Buick sports car, a Grand Tourer, a personal luxury coupe that end all Buick personal luxury coupes. This was to be Buick's halo car to close out the 80s and to usher in the 90s. Gone was Buick's signature waterfall grille, instead an 80s wedge up there with the best of 80s wedges. This is the only Buick to be sold with true pop-up headlights. There would be other Buicks with hidden headlights such as the 2nd Gen Riviera and certain trims of the 2nd Gen Skyhawk, but those would utilize shutters or fold-down covers, not the pop-ups that would make every rad air nerd blush. But aside from its shape, aside from its design, the Buick Reatta's biggest claim to fame was the fact that Buick had designed a working touchscreen in the freaking 80s. Known as the Graphic Control Center, it worked much like today's touchscreens, incorporating vehicle diagnostics, HVAC controls, and radio controls within it. First seen on the 7th Gen Riviera for the 1986 model year, the GCC utilized a cathode ray tube designed like your parents' old TV to present the screen. Every screen has a shortcut to go directly to it, so it's more intuitive than a lot of modern systems that like to bury settings on screens. You can check your diagnostic codes, check out your fluid levels, temps, pressures. Want to change the fan speed? There's a little fan icon that increases or decreases speed depending on the fan setting. And it works well. Like, for all the crap that they put out, when GM really tried to do something advanced for the time, they can knock it out of the park. This was way too advanced for the time, especially as Buicks were, and still are, mostly bought by older men who definitely didn't know what to do when faced with a newfangled computer screen in their automobile. But if you've been behind the wheel of any car built in the last 15 to 20 years, this system is extremely easy to use, and it's impressively responsive, especially if you remember how laggy early screen systems were in the late aughts and early 2010s. But yeah, the old people of the late 80s definitely were not ready for such a system in their car, complained a bunch, and the system was phased out before the end of the Reatta's 4-year model run. The Reatta would be introduced in 1987 as a 1988 model, and would be produced at a repurposed Oldsmobile foundry known as the Reatta Craft Center. Now, a quick little sidebar on the eventual Lansing Craft Center as it would be known. It would be best known as GM's low-volume plant in the 90s and aughts. As following the Reatta, GM would produce the Cavalier and Sunfire convertibles, the final Cadillac Eldorados, the GM EV1, and the Chevy SSR there. Like most late 80s American luxury car halo products, Buick had big plans for the Reatta, with goals of selling over 20,000 a year. However, sales would struggle in the 4-digit range per year. And despite launching a convertible version in 1990 in conjunction with ASC, it would get the axe in 1991. I mean, it sold a lot better than the Chrysler TC by Maserati, and it wasn't a significant loss leader like the TC due to the fact that Buick had built the Reatta in Michigan instead of being built in Italy like the TC, or split between two manufacturing facilities between Michigan and Italy like the Cadillac Elante. But like those other cars, it was still pricey. I mean, the Reatta was a Halo product. This was supposed to be Buick's most expensive product at the time. A sporty-ish two-door coupe with a wedge-like shape and possibly one of the most advanced infotainment systems at the time. Despite all this, it still started way less than a TC with a base price of $25,000 when it launched in 1988. It also beat the TC to market by a whole model year due to the TC's torrid development that saw constant infighting between Chrysler and Maserati. Now, that $25,000 converts to $66,261 in 2024 dollars, compared to the TC's 1989 price converting over to $81,000 in 2024 dollars. To gauge where that lands in Buick's current lineup, that's still more than Buick's current top product, the top-of-the-line Enclave Avenir, which starts at just $57,500. I know, apples and oranges since the Enclave Avenir is a large luxury crossover compared to this sporty-ish Grand Tourer, but still an idea of where this landed price-wise. Under the hood, you had one engine available, a 3.8-liter Buick V6. 88 to 90 models got the LM3 V6, while rare 91 models got the updated L27. Hooked up to the 3.8 would be any one of GM's 4-speed transaxles. 88-89 models got the 440T4, 90 models got the 4T60, and 91 models got the 4T60E. Of course, power sent to the front wheels, as is customary in a large GM luxury car. The Reatta sat on GM's newly downsized E-body platform, sharing with the 7th generation Buick Riviera, the 11th and 12th generation Cadillac Eldorados, and the 4th generation Oldsmobile Toronado. While technically not a W-body, if you've driven a W-body GM product, then you have a rough idea of how the Reatta drives. Kinda floaty but smooth. I know the Wikipedia pages likes to list the Reatta as a sports car, but it's honestly a Grand Tourer and kind of an old school one at that. This isn't a canyon carver, it's a Sunday driver. Something to cruise around the countryside after churchin'. Now the 3.8 is smooth in that classic Buick 3.8 way, and honestly the 4-speed transaxle is inoffensive if you just think of this as a cruiser and not an apex hitter. But the suspension soaks up the bumps with ease and has a little bit of lean but not too much. And the steering feels like 80s and 90s front-wheel drive GM. Light but not totally truck-like. It's a Buick, this isn't going to be a BMW. As someone who grew up in their grandmother's old Centuries, this is fine. This is what I had hoped the Chrysler TC by Maserati would drive like. Not sports car-like, but not at constant odds of what it was trying to be. The TC had sportyish handling and the laziest boat-like steer on this side of a pickup truck. The Reatta at least finds more of a balance between these two ideologies. It knows what it is from the start, not two companies at war of what they were trying to make. This particular 1989 Buick Reatta originally came from New Jersey, and it has over 254,000 miles, which is incredible considering that most of these cars were bought to sit in garages and take out on weekends during nice weather. Whoever owned this car absolutely loved it and drove it constantly. At some point this car ended up in North Carolina, and it ended up with the engine swap you see under the hood. Yeah, I know, I've been ignoring that since the start of the video, but yeah, it's still a 3.8-liter Buick V6, but this happens to be the L67 Series 1 supercharged from a 91 to 95 Park Avenue Ultra. While the original 3800 would have produced between 165 to 170 horsepower and either 210 or 220 foot-pounds of torque depending on the model year, the L67 bumps that up to either 205 or 225 horsepower depending on what year of Park Avenue Ultra this came out of. And that's thanks to the Eaton M62 superchargers you see proudly slapped on top of this old engine. This is the engine that gets GM guys all fizzy feeling. A decent amount of power and surprisingly reliable for a 90s GM engine. And that sums up this car. Yeah, the clear coat is worn, yeah, the center console lid and the swapped in Pontiac Bonneville seats are cracked and worn. Yes, the tape deck doesn't work, but the rest of the car does brilliantly. This is not just a well-made car for the time, it's a well-made GM car for the time. And it's honestly easy to work on too, because this is essentially just a W body, just in his fancy hat. If you worked on an old Buick or Oldsmobile, everything under the hood should be how you remember it. The current owner, Wilson, absolutely loves this car. Him and his friend Jarrett, the same fellow whose Chrysler TC and Eagle Summit that I filmed earlier this year, found this car for sale in the back of a garage in Mooresville, North Carolina, and were able to score it for $1,200 after it was determined it needed a fuel system. Yeah, it ended up needing a pump, a tank, and a sending unit, as it was stored with a nearly full tank of gas for 5-ish, 6-ish years. He honestly doesn't know, but that did lead to the discovery that those 3 things have all been discontinued for years to this point. They did learn that period Eldorado units work in this car, so that's what they have now. The only trade-off now is the fact that the gauge now reads about a quarter tank less than what it actually in it, but where this isn't Wilson's primary daily driver, he just makes sure he tops it off every so often just to be safe. This is the type of car that was GM's bread and butter, but honestly, the Reatta was simply too weird and expensive for a typical Buick buyer. I mean, look at it. Despite it having the wedge-like shape that would make any rat era nerd like me croon, it just looks off. The nose is super long, and it doesn't quite seem like it's proportional to the short rear of the car. The door tops dip for some reason in the center, and the rear wraparound glass just adds to the overall 80s weirdness of it. But that glass does mean that this car is simply fantastic to see out of, as there's hardly any blind spots behind you. The truck opening is small, and honestly the trunk feels shallow, but it's still plenty large enough to fit a golf bag into it. Also, the latch is entirely operated electronically, so if the battery dies, yeah, you're kind of out of luck unless you can get to the lock and access from the cab. Also, the turn signal chime sounds like it should be a low fuel chime or something, anything but the turn signal.
Oh, the dinging is very loud on the turn signal.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a turn signal.
They said it's because, old people can't hear the turn signal, so they try to make it as loud as possible.
Like, I kept checking gauges thinking there was something wrong with the car, but no, it's just the turn signal. But aside from all its weirdness and abject failure, I like the Buick Reatta. It's weird in good ways. And it's weird in just how forward-thinking Buick was with the infotainment in this car. Buick, in hindsight, was shockingly innovative in the 80s. And that's been sadly lost with time as GM has settled in their ways again, and Buick has just become an old folks brand for old folks who couldn't afford a Cadillac. This Reatta is a testament to that innovation, and I was shocked to learn of the mileage of this car and just how well it's held up mechanically and in appearance. The GCC should not be working, as with the digital dash, but they somehow do perfectly, despite the daily wear and tear this car underwent for years. This is one of Buick's last gasps of innovation before they became a mid-level dumping ground for gussied up Chevys and Pontiacs. This was the Buick that Buick should be aiming for again, instead of slowly morphing into a weird mash of luxury and budget cars. 1989 Buick Reatta with a L67 Series 1 supercharged swap. A fantastic Sunday cruiser. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you once again for watching another episode of Wookie Drives. Huge shout out to Wilson of Shelby, North Carolina for letting me drive his old Buick project car for this show. If you have a car truck you'd like to see on the show and happen to be in the Charlotte or specifically Mooresville, North Carolina area, email me a submission of your car to wookiedrives@gmail.com. That's right, submit your car to wookiedrives@gmail.com. That's wookiedrives@gmail.com. Don't forget to give the video a like. Drop a comment with some feedback. Any sort of interaction with this video really helps small channels like mine grow in the algorithm. Share with all your Buick Reatta friends. And finally, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell for notifications for more Wookie Drives like these. Thank you so much for watching and have a good day.
It's the statement you make as you travel through life. Distinctive, decidedly you. The great American road.